Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Connor Keniston, and I'm a history professor over at Randolph College down the street. But more importantly, I attend here, for today anyway, I attend here at First Christian Church and am pinch hitting for Reverend Jarrett Banks as he's away at a conference up in New Haven. Filling in for Jarrett, I'd just like to say again, thank you so much for being here. We've got a really wonderful service. And I'd also like to note before we begin, if you are like me and you start to get the mid-afternoon tummy rumbles, no, there is a reception afterward downstairs in the reception hall. So I please would invite you to come join us downstairs after the service. Also, I'd like to note that because we do have a PowerPoint for our amazing speaker today, if you want to move forward, know that you're more than welcome to. You can even be sneaky and do it while we sing in a little bit. I invite you to be in an attitude of prayer. O Divine One, God of all peoples, nations, and races, we are gathered here together, gathered in this space. Though we come from different traditions, we are here together in this community. We are here to breathe together. We are here to learn together. We are here to remember together. We know that this intentional collective remembering, this history, is not always easy. Be with us in our speaking and in our listening. Open our hearts so that our gathering today may not simply be a telling of stories about the past, but the start of a new story. A story that calls us to say, never again, and to live our lives and raise our voices so that indeed may be so. In the name of love and justice, we pray. Amen. I invite you to grab the red book in front of you. It says Chalice Hymnal. And we're going to be singing God of Abraham Praise. You can find the words and music in the red hymnal number 24. So please stand and join me in singing.
seated. I'm Rabbi Harley Kars-Wagman from Agudath Shalom, from the only synagogue in our area. And together, as Connor did, I also like to welcome everyone here to our annual Interfaith Holocaust Yom HaShoah commemoration program. Today, once again, we remember and we hear stories about the Holocaust, that systematic state-sponsored murder, persecution, and torture of 6 million Jews. And the Nazis, as you know, also killed millions of others. But it wasn't just the Nazis. We try to use the phrase the Nazis and their collaborators, because the Shoah was perpetrated only because the Nazis had millions of collaborators throughout Europe, and they were enabled by hundreds of millions of bystanders. For the past decade, as most of you know well, we've witnessed a surge of anti-Semitism, driven by fear coming from across the political spectrum. Now, history does not repeat, but it echoes. The curriculum used most often to teach American teachers and students about Holocaust history, in fact, is called Echoes and Reflections. And that explains why we gather today. We're here to listen for the echoes. We will reflect on how they fit for us today, and hopefully, as Connor just so wonderfully articulated, we will commit to our own action to prevent future tragedies. The Nazis seized power and gained and perpetrated the Holocaust based upon extreme nationalism, driven by their overwhelming and exaggerated fears. In recent years, we have witnessed a global surge of exactly that kind of nationalism. Worship of country over God, over humanity, over love for others and even for ourselves. Nationalism became the religion of the Nazis. It was their source for finding meaning in a world that felt discomforted and unpredictable. All nationalism, whether it is the worship of a nation, or the worship maybe of your own ethnic group, or the worship of a religious group, is driven by these overwhelming fears, this desperate need to find someone else to blame, that scapegoat. And then it is fanned by the demagogues who will gain power or money or followers or the currency of today, attention. Today we will remember where that fear-given nationalism can lead. Yet we will also recall the resistors and rescuers, the liberators, those courageous individuals who inspire us today. Emil Fackenheim was one of the leading philosophers about faith after the Holocaust, and he taught us this lesson as one, I hope, of our takeaways. That if the resistors and rescuers and liberators back then, in the midst of the worst evil ever committed by humanity, could find the hope, the wisdom, and the courage to resist the Nazis and their collaborators, then we today can find the hope, wisdom, and courage to resist evil. We begin with a reading about the value of silence, which you will find in your programs.
Silence does not just bring words and noise to a standstill. Silence is more than the temporary renunciation of speech. It is a door opening before prayer toward the very realms of the spirit and the heart. Silence is the beginning of a reckoning of the soul, the prelude to an account of the past and consideration of the present. May our shared silence lead us to awareness of a time of total evil that degraded our most precious values, the very meaning of religious existence and of life itself. May our silence become a committed accounting for other silences, which accepted persecutions and were indifferent to debasement and crime.
We light 7 candles to honor the memory of 6 million Jews and millions of other people who were the victims of the Nazis and their collaborators. We remember the lives of 6 million Jews and millions of others, Roma and Sinti, that is, Gypsies, Poles, Soviet prisoners of war, LGBTQ+ people, differently abled, Jehovah's Witnesses, and political and religious dissidents in Europe. We will remember. All feminism aside, give it to the guy. We remember that our souls are linked with those who were murdered, so that we can contribute to the continuation of their unfulfilled dreams and hopes. We will remember.
We remember to emulate the valiant spirit of those who rose up in the ghettos, the camps, and throughout Europe to defend the honor of humanity.
We will remember.
We remember to tell their story from generation to generation, to learn the details so that we can avoid the mistakes of the past.
We will remember.
We remember those righteous Gentiles, those individuals with the courage to care, who risked their lives to save Jews and other innocent victims, the rescuers and the greatest liberators, the Allied soldiers, whose bravery saved millions.
We will remember.
We pledge to work toward a day when all peoples will renounce our past horrors and join hands to proclaim that we are all one family.
We will remember.
We will show awe and honor by silence. Silence in the face of overwhelming proportions of the tragedy of the Holocaust.
We will remember.
Warsaw was one of the larger ghettos, with over 500,000 Jews cramped into a small area. In July 1942, the Nazis began transporting those Jews to death camps, such as nearby Treblinka. Within 2 months, less than 60,000 Jews remained alive in Warsaw. A Jewish resistance was organized, despite the lack of weapons, food, or medicine. Small Jewish combat groups drove the Nazi soldiers out of the ghetto again and again. Not until 7 months later, in April 1943, did the Nazis launch a final attack on the ghetto. With tanks and a massive force, the Nazis invaded. For 28 days, Jews fought the Nazis house by house and building by building. The Nazi commander reported that all the remaining Jews were killed or sent to death camps. In fact, about 100 resistance fighters escaped to tell their story. Jewish resistance occurred in every ghetto and every camp. Warsaw was one of the rare settings in which the resistance was not crushed immediately.
In almost every country which the Nazis conquered, the local population accepted anti-Jewish rules and cooperated in sending Jews to the death camps. Denmark was an exception. In April 1940, the Germans invaded and occupied Denmark. About 8,000 Jews then lived in Denmark. The Danes refused to impose Nazi restrictions on the Danish Jews. Over 3 years later, in 1943, the Germans took over direct control of Denmark and sent a large occupying army. The Danes discovered a secret Nazi plan to ship all 8,000 Jews to concentration camps. Non-Jewish Danes resisted. They hid their Jewish neighbors. They provided food and medicine, and they arranged for dozens of boats to smuggle the Jews across miles of water to Sweden, a neutral country. On one night in October of 1943, nearly 7,500 Jews crossed the water to safety in Sweden. The Nazis arrested the other 500 and sent them to the concentration camp in Theresienstadt. Remarkably, even there, less than 100 Jews died, thanks to constant intervention by the Danish Red Cross. The Danish people were the only Europeans to resist with such widespread, persistent, ongoing efforts.
Hannah Senesh was born in Budapest, Hungary. She became a Zionist and immigrated to Palestine in 1939 at the age of 18. In 1943, she joined a clandestine military operation by the Palmach, the Jewish army, as a paratrooper. And in March 1944, she was dropped into Yugoslavia to support anti-Nazi forces in her native Hungary, where the largest numbers of Jews left in Europe lived, all threatened by death from the Nazis. Senesh was captured in June and sent to a prison in Budapest where she was tortured. Since she would not talk, Hungarian authorities arrested her mother. Both women remained silent. Given the chance to beg for a pardon in November of 1944, chose death by firing squad. Her mother was instrumental in keeping her daughter's memory alive. She published Hannah's diary, poetry, and plays, including the poem Eli, Eli, which was later set to music and which we hear now sung by Mark Ordeworth.
Shelo yigamer leolam, hachol v'kayam, rishru shel shamayim, baharak hashamayim, tefilat ha'adam, hachol v'chayam, rishru shel hamayim, barak hashamayim, tefilat ha'adam. O God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the flash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, hachol v'chayam, rishru shel hamayim, barak hashamayim, tefilat ha'adam. Eli, Eli.
Good afternoon. My name is Patty Worsham, and I've been involved with the Holocaust Education Foundation for about 26 years, just a couple years after it was founded by Roselle Schul, Brian Ray, and Clifton Potter. Originally, the purpose was to establish a 501c3 organization so that Brian could get funds to take young people, his middle school students, on trips to the Holocaust Museum, and it has become so much more than that. Our purpose is to create awareness of the Holocaust and other genocides, and to inspire dialogue and understanding, hoping to break down the walls that have so polarized our country, and to replace this hate speech and prejudice with embracing the common humanity that should unite us. In the last years, we have sort of a three-prong approach. We provide training for teachers through annual workshops, through Echoes and Reflections. Then we also do outreach to the schools, and finally we bring in speakers. In the last years, we have been able to sponsor Dr. Brightman from Duke University speaking on Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin and what they knew and when they knew it. Brian Krim, who talked about Jewish emigres. We sponsored a film about Vera Gran, who was a participant who lived in Poland and has a very complicated story that makes us understand that even for survivors, life was not simple. And finally, a poetry reading by John Guslowski, who is the child of Holocaust survivors. And we're very excited to announce that Ted Brennick will be speaking to us at the Randolph Chapel at 3 o'clock on May 3rd. In addition, one of our new outreach is to sponsor a international Holocaust Day in the public schools. So for the last 3 years, EC Glass has observed that day, a little late this year because of snow, and then we follow it by sponsoring a week of kindness, where students are encouraged to give affirmations to one another, to wear stickers proclaiming their tolerance and dedication to kindness. We also were able to sponsor 30 students going on a field trip to the museum in Washington at Heritage High School. And finally, one thing we have done for over 20 years is to sponsor a writing contest in the high schools and middle schools to encourage students to explore the themes of the Holocaust and do more research. So today I'm pleased to invite Caroline Shoemaker and Ez Seifert up. And because we had to extend our deadline for the contest this year, we're actually reading some poems from past winners, but I think you will understand why they were chosen. So Ez and Caroline, want to come up?
One Too Many, Kate O'Connell. I know where your body is, and I know where they killed you. Hell, I even watched them do it. But where are you now? Won't you tell me? I hear the grunts of the abusers and the cries of the abused, but one sound drowns out all others, the sound of the wind whistling through my emptiness, through my hollow bones in my chest. It punctuates the silence my dead heart should fill. When you fell to your knees at the sound of the bullet, it happened so quick, like the sound of it scared you to death. That's what I told myself, of course, as you and God bled in the earth together, like brothers. My father used to say, when I asked him of war, that one death was one too many. But now he is dead, and so are you. So tell me whose death, between the two, is the one that is one too many.
Silence, by Marina Pantner. There is a silence, where in some other timeline, a mother calls out to her son from the kitchen. A 15-year-old girl complains about trigonometry. A man sings to himself as he brushes his hair. There is a silence, where all that life should have been. Where instead, there are holes in the earth's patchwork of generations. Daughters and sons are never born. I hope it is deafening. I hope it screams in our ears, never ending and painful, forces us to remember their silence, the one shoved down their throats by hands made of fear, defeat, and things that in my privileged life I will never know to name. I pray that for every day, hour, minute, we never stop hearing all that emptiness.
The Tendency to Last, Riley Crossan. While the body will pass, the soul tends to last. It hangs around to tickle the tongues, invoking good memories to speak of those who it had loved. While the body will pass, the soul tends to last. A shadow on the shoulder, reminding and guiding, a steady hand to lead through the darker times. While the body will pass, the soul tends to last, peppering the person about days long gone until tears begin to form and the walls begin to crumble. Climb and crawl one can, but falling back is part of the plan. Not or fear of losing that beautiful soul and all of its memories. Cling not or fear of losing one's mind to the darkness that easily engulfs. While the body will pass, the soul tends to last.
Letter to an unnamed relative. Tell me that story, that one you've told 452 times, 452 ways. All of them the truth, and sometimes even out loud. I don't know you, but I swear, a piece of you circulates inside me. It is the piece that flinches when I'm touched, gets chills at the smell of sulfur, grows numb to the sight of skin and bone. But it's also the piece that tingles when I dance and clutches to cool breath and warm air. You have been a diamond and a key and a pistol, but mostly, you have been alive.
the mortician, Meg Gladeau. As an anatomist, he couldn't help but see the ribs as cages that held them like birds until they suffocated. But then there was his own caged self, the part that couldn't help but hope they had all flown away before they could know the drip, drip of dying, or the taste of smoke and ash. He chose to believe that somehow they all flew away, leaving behind empty cages, collapsed bodies, and now they were only somewhere with good food and warm music.
Future. Like bread, soft and warm, with holes that whisper imperfection and scream that it was kneaded by hand. I swallow empty, chew pain, sip hurt and hollow bone. It tastes like smoke and hope. I've bit the blade of oppression, though it never touched me, melted and curled in my acid like a penny in my stomach. It reminds me to stand up straight. I want to go back and fix it, take hammer and nail to hatred and build it into bravery. I can't bend time, but the cosmos can. And even with all the clouds lately, I counted 18 stars last night that twinkled in aliveness.
We have the privilege of hearing a keynote speech by a local scholar, Dr. Lindsay McNeil. She is a historian for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC, but she works from here and from all over the country, the world, a very busy traveling person. Dr. McNeil is local. She graduated from E.C. Glass High School, earned her bachelor's degree in both history and Spanish from the University of North Carolina down in Chapel Hill. She then completed her PhD in history at American University. She's held fellowships for the Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies, Fulbright, Austria, and the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute for Holocaust Studies. She's also served as an assistant editor of the journal Holocaust and Genocide Studies, as well as worked in various capacities as an educator and researcher for the museum's Levine Institute for Holocaust Education. It is a great honor and pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. Lindsay McNeil.
Thank you so much. Sorry for my voice. I think it's going to get there. Thank you so much, Rabbi, and everybody for being here. I am especially touched to be here to speak to you as we come together to recognize Yom HaShoah, or Days of Remembrance, the nation's annual commemoration of the Holocaust. The Holocaust was the systematic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany and its allies and collaborators. The Nazis also persecuted, brutalized, and murdered millions of non-Jews. As we learn about the Holocaust, we are often struck by the sheer scale of mass murder. 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were killed. This was 2 out of every 3 Jews in Europe. As I was preparing my remarks for today, I tried to think of what to say about this number. What words could I possibly use to make the murder of 6 million people legible? I'm not sure it's truly possible, but the only way I can try is by providing you with a few more statistics that I believe help to convey the enormity of the crime. Of the 6 million victims of the Holocaust, about 2.7 million, nearly half, were murdered at the killing centers of Helmno, Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, and Auschwitz-Birkenau. At these sites, the Nazis murdered Jewish people in gas chambers, specifically built to kill them. Slide for me. At Belzec, a Nazi report documents 434,508 victims. 2 of them were Henoch Kornfeld and Blemsha Elisha, cousins, murdered at Belzec in the summer of 1942, about 1 year after this photograph was taken. And another. During the Holocaust, the Nazis and their helpers murdered as many as 2 million Jewish people in mass shooting operations and other massacres. In many cases, the perpetrators shot entire families into mass graves near their hometowns. In Aishashuk, a town in what is today Lithuania, the Nazis recorded the murder of 989 men, 1,636 women, and 821 children in a massacre in late September 1941. Slide. Among the victims were Shlomo, Masha, Sarah, Chaim Moshe, Rivka, and Hannah Dubchansky. They were murdered less than 3 years after this photograph was taken. And another. In concentration camps, labor camps, and ghettos, the Nazis and their helpers murdered hundreds of thousands of Jews by depriving them of food, shelter, and medical care, and in arbitrary and cruel acts of violence. In the Łódź ghetto in German-occupied Poland, more than 45,000 Jewish people died due to deliberate deprivation, disease, and brutal treatment. Slide. Among them was Hela Shapsevich, a mother, whose death was recorded on April 5th, 1943. 14 other deaths were recorded in the ghetto the same day. And at least 250,000. This is the number of Jewish people murdered by the Nazis and their partners and helpers in pogroms, on death marches, as resistance fighters, and in other violent ways. For instance, in June 1941, 14,000 Jews were murdered during an anti-Jewish riot called a pogrom in Iași, Romania. Slide. Among them were the 8 men, 1 woman, and 1 child whose photographs you see here. Each of these statistics represent shocking atrocities that must be multiplied thousands of times over. But to understand the scope of destruction during the Holocaust, we must also remember that the Nazis and their helpers annihilated entire Jewish communities and ways of life. The Nazis murdered members of Yiddish-language theater troupes, Hebrew-language societies, Jewish political clubs, soccer teams, and countless other communal organizations. They desecrated and destroyed Jewish places of worship and Jewish cemeteries. They emptied Jewish neighborhoods. And in occupied Eastern Europe, they wiped out scores of shtetls that had existed for centuries. Shtetl is a Yiddish word that means a small market town with a majority Jewish population. Shtetls hold a special place in Jewish history, as communities where Jewish tradition and Judaism determined the rhythm of life. Today, as we remember the lives and the communities that were lost in the Holocaust, I want to share with you the story of the shtetl of Aishashuk. Before World War II, Aishashuk was in Poland. Today, it is in Lithuania. On the eve of the Holocaust, the town of Aishashuk was home to about 2,000 or 3,000 people, and it was about 70% Jewish. Jews had lived there for centuries. But this was a multi-ethnic, multi-religious region that was also home to Belarusians, Lithuanians, Poles, Tatars, and others. It included Catholics, Jews, Muslims, and Orthodox Christians. Most of the Jewish population spoke Yiddish, but many also spoke Polish, Hebrew, or other languages. Economic life for the Jewish community in Aishashuk revolved around the market square and the weekly market that was held there on Thursdays. Market day was a chaotic experience with shopping, bartering, and arguing. It was loud and smelly. People and animals packed Aishashuk's main square. Many Jewish families bought or sold goods on Thursdays. They traded with their neighbors and both Jewish and non-Jewish people who had traveled in from the countryside. For instance, Miriam Kaganovich, circled here, sold cheese and other dairy products. Miriam's husband, Shael, was a traveling salesman, and the family also ran a liquor store. Miriam and Shael's son, Leon, was going to school to become an engineer. On Wednesday nights, more than a dozen non-Jewish farmers from the outlying areas would come to stay at the Kaganovich family home. Thursdays were also a busy day for the Jewish families who managed and owned small businesses. Alta and Yuri Katz ran a pharmacy, a bakery, and a photography studio. This photograph shows Alta with her son, Avigdor Katz, her grandson, Yitzhak, and her great-nephew, Shoah. The boys were so close in age that they often played together. Master seamstress Rochelle Shulkin had a sewing workshop where she and other women in town made clothes on sewing machines. The Kabachnik family owned a tannery. They were one of the most successful families in town, and they lived in a large house on the market square. On Thursdays, the entire family, including the youngest daughter, Miriam, pictured here, pitched in to sell leather goods. While many Jewish families in Aishashuk were poor and lived hand to mouth, the Kabachniks were wealthy, at least by Aishashuk standards. They had a gramophone and a radio, and Miriam regularly hosted her 12 girlfriends for parties. The day after Market Day was Friday, and on Friday, the entire rhythm of life in Aishashuk changed. In accordance with Jewish religious tradition, Shabbos, the Sabbath, begins at sundown on Friday and ends at sundown on Saturday. Many Jewish families spent the day on Friday preparing. Miriam Kabachnik made challah and gefilte fish. Like many women in the shtetl, Nechama Mikalovsky made sholet, a slow-cooked stew traditionally eaten on the Sabbath. Even though the Mikalovskys were not wealthy, Nechama made extra to give to needier families. Near the main square, there was a synagogue complex where the town's Jewish citizens worshipped. Nechama's husband, Manny, was a teacher at a Heder, where boys were schooled in Jewish texts and traditions. He also worked as a shamus, a caretaker, for the synagogue. His son, Zvi, often joined him. Like many men and boys in Aishashuk, Manny and Zvi were devoted students of the Torah and spent most of their time at the synagogue. On Saturdays, young Zvi would attend services in the main synagogue and in the two Batei Midrash, centers of Jewish learning. He would debate and argue with the rabbis about matters of scripture. One of Aishashuk's rabbis, Rabbi Shimon Rozovsky, is pictured here at a gathering honoring a large gift to the synagogue. In fact, Aishashuk's residents often photographed important moments. Family gatherings, formal portraits, bike races, reunions, and fundraising events. They had photographs made to celebrate special gatherings such as weddings, like this one of Rabbi Rozovsky's daughter in 1932. They took photos of Saturday night gatherings, like this one at Miriam Kabachnik's house in 1938, and they photographed birthday parties, like this one's, for cousins Shula and Yafa Sonnenson, the two girls standing proudly in the front row. But of course, Aishashuk wasn't perfect or always harmonious. Some people described it as old, dirty, and worn down. The older generations were worried about younger generations straying from tradition. Young people often moved away, seeking opportunities in bigger cities or even abroad. There were prejudices, fights, and arguments, class differences between wealthy families and poorer ones. Anti-Semitism, the hatred of or prejudice against Jews, shaped many aspects of life in the shtetl. In other words, Aishashuk was a community with a rich history. Some people from there loved it, and others hated it. Some saw its beauty, while others saw its decline. During the Holocaust, Jewish life in Aishashuk, with all of its complexities, came to an abrupt end. In late June 1941, Nazi German troops occupied the town. The Germans subjected Jews to forced labor, violence, and public humiliation. They required Aishashuk's Jewish residents to wear a Star of David badge. They humiliated religious Jewish men by cutting their beards. They banned Jews from walking on the sidewalks, forcing them into the filth on the street. Then, on Sunday, September 21st, 1941, the eve of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, armed strangers appeared in town. They were Lithuanian helpers working with the German killing squad. They ordered the Jews of Aishashuk to surrender their remaining valuables and to gather in the synagogue. For 2 days and 3 nights, the Jewish people of Aishashuk were held without food or water. People started to panic. They began to yell and scream. Children cried. One of the rabbis began to lead the people in prayer. Then, on Wednesday, September 24th, the perpetrators took their Jewish prisoners outside. They led them a few blocks away to a field, the outdoor horse market. To get there, the Jews passed through the middle of their town. Some of their non-Jewish neighbors gathered to watch and even cheer. On Thursday, the perpetrators began to lead Jewish men away to the old Jewish cemetery on the outskirts of town. There, they shot them into a mass grave. The next day, the perpetrators began to massacre the women and children. They drove them in wagons about 1 mile to a gravel pit. There, they assaulted and killed them. Among those who were murdered were the Dubchansky family, Alta and Yuri Katz, who owned the photography studio, their son, Avigdor, Rabbi Rozovsky and his wife, Rochelle Shulkin, the master seamstress, and many of the women who worked for her, Manny Mikolovsky, who ran the Hader and his wife Nechama, who made extra cholent for needy families, Shula Sonensen, one of the birthday girls, and Miriam Kabachnik's 12 girlfriends. They were shot in mass executions, buried in mass graves with no marker, given no last rites, and contrary to their religious traditions. A few of Aishashuk's residents did manage to survive the massacre and even the 3 harrowing years that followed. They survived in hiding and as resistance fighters, thanks to local helpers, their own ingenuity, and sheer luck. Among the survivors were the other birthday girl, Yafa Sonensen, the party host, Miriam Kabachnik, the engineering student, Leon Kaganovich, and Zvi Mikolovsky, the teenager who liked to argue with the rabbis. In a few days, in late September, hundreds of years of Jewish life in Aishashuk came to an abrupt and violent end. The Nazis and their helpers annihilated an entire community. The perpetrators were motivated by intense anti-Semitic hatred. The intention was not just murder, but erasure. But despite Nazi efforts, the Jews of Aishashuk have not been forgotten or completely erased. Thanks to the efforts of survivor Yafa Sonensen Eliach, their town lives on in a new form. Aishashuk, in all its ordinary beauty, is remembered in the Tower of Faces, an exhibit at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. The tower features more than 1,000 photographs from Aishashuk, some of which I have shared with you today. Yafa Sonensen Eliach described this as, quote, a memorial to life, not to death. A memorial that she hoped, quote, could transcend those images of death and do justice to the full, rich lives those people had lived. Today, you all bear witness to the memory of Aishashuk, to the full, rich lives that were brutally cut short. It is thanks to Yafa Sonensen Eliach and the other survivors that we remember Aishashuk. And by remembering Aishashuk, we remember the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children murdered by the Nazis and their helpers just because they were Jewish. Thank you.
Before our final reading, we'd like to thank so many people who made today's program possible. It's beginning especially with Connor Keniston, who helped organize, coordinate, logisticize, and all the things that make a program like this possible. For our musical support, we thank Judy Goding, we thank Jeremy Kraft, we thank Mark Ordor for all that you provided us. We thank all of those ministers and faith leader, Sean, gonna find a category for you, that have helped us with various readings today, as well as our high school students, who Patty Worsham from the Holocaust Education Foundation presented for the lovely poetry that they honored us with, and finally and especially Dr. Lindsay McNeil for helping us to understand the humanity and the individual stories of the lives that were lost during the Holocaust. For our final reading, you'll find it toward the lower right-hand side of the middle of your program.
Would you join me in our reading? I'd rather pretend it never happened. I'd rather believe that the sky was never blackened by the smoke of human death, that children and mothers and innocent men were never victims of such a magnitude of hate. I'd rather pretend it never happened. But if I have to remember, if I must look into this gaping scar of human ignorance, I want to believe that it could only happen once in the history of this universe. Yet history has a terrible way of echoing in the stone-hard canyons of bigotry, repeating itself again and again. I'd rather pretend it never happened, for in remembering, the world seems a frightening place where we cannot celebrate, but would rather exterminate our differences and merge into one large mass of sameness. I'd rather pretend it never happened and believe that it could never happen again. Yet I know that as long as I look upon even one other person with seeds of hate and fail to see him as my brother or her as my sister or them as my family, then my own precious soul is fertile ground for these seeds to sprout yet another Holocaust.
invite you to stand. We will close today in silence. Once you are done reflecting on what you learned today, on the words we've heard, on the words printed in front of you, I invite you to join us downstairs for the reception. Go now in peace.